I just want to welcome everybody to day 4 of our challenge. I want to share my screen so we can do just a little recap of what we did yesterday. So we talked about approaches to managing diabetes and how we're going to be looking at things that treat root causes, move you towards fewer medicines, move you towards the disease reversal quadrant. We talked about the importance of sleep, and we talked about managing stress. So I hope that those were topics that were helpful to you. Today, we are going to give you some more tools and strategies to help you get to your destination. At the end of our presentation today, we're going to have a little sharing time where you can share what your goals are, some of your strategies and plans, and then also integrate some things that we're learning today, and we'll give you your new homework. But I'm just really happy that today we are able to have Cindy Lefler with us. Cindy Lefler is a registered dietitian. I think she's going to introduce herself to you a little bit more. And she's going to be doing our main presentation today. So welcome, Cindy. It's wonderful to have you.
Before we get going, yesterday Lucia ended her presentation by suggesting that we spend some time thinking about what are some of the challenges that we may be facing this holiday season. So I would like to ask that you put in the chat box either your biggest challenge or one of your challenges to making healthy choices during the upcoming holidays time. I will be talking a little bit more about some of those challenges in the presentation, but today and tomorrow, we'll try to address some of the specific challenges that you feel that you'll be facing. So my name is Cindy Lefler. I'm a registered dietitian. You see me pictured here on the left with our daughter and my husband. This is when we climbed a mountain in the Philippines. Our daughter is over there working as an air medevac nurse. We climbed this mountain in the middle of a rainstorm. So it's not perhaps the best picture of us, but it's the most recent one we have together because we were there in the Philippines with her last December. And then on the right is our son and his wife, Matthew and Rachel, and their 3 children, Emily, Alyssa, and Luke. And I'm really excited that we're going to go see them in a couple of weeks. So as I said, I'm a registered dietitian. A couple of years ago, my husband and I moved to Michigan in order to help care for our parents. But just before we lived here, we lived in Weimar, California, which is in Northern California. Okay, so I spent 5 years at Weimar as a food service director, and it gave me a front row seat to watch people come in over and over and over again and make lifestyle changes that were amazingly impactful in their health. And so I'm pretty well convinced, I'm really excited about the opportunity to share some of the things that I learned there, as well as through practice along through the years. And it's really just very exciting to see the impact that lifestyle makes on people's health, and what simple means if the body is placed in the right environment, it can be healthy, it can regain health. It's just amazing to watch. So I'm excited to be able to share with you today. C. Everett Koop was a U.S. Surgeon General many years ago, and he has this quote that I absolutely love. For the 2 out of 3 adult Americans who do not smoke and do not drink excessively, one personal choice seems to influence long-term health prospects more than any other, and that is what we eat. And when I talk to parents, sometimes parents have issues with their children's eating. I usually say to them, try not to have a battle over eating, because it's the one thing that a person personally controls themselves. It's not something that you cannot force someone to swallow. You cannot force someone to eat something. It's something that we have complete control over in our own lives. We can choose what we will and what we will not eat. And so I just want to encourage you, anything that I say, I would not have you look at it as a deprivation or as a negative thing, but actually it's a positive thing. We have freedom of choice to eat what we choose to eat. And with education and with good choices, we can have health if we will do that. Another quote here from T. Colin Campbell. He wrote a book called The China Study. Everything in food works together to either create health or to create disease. And so we are making choices on a daily basis that will lead us towards health or lead us the opposite direction. And then Richard Lukens, who was one of the physicians at New Start, the New Start lifestyle program at Weimar, one of his favorite, he was a little suspicious of us in the cafeteria because we would blend up cashews, and he didn't know always what was in the food. So he liked to eat whole plant foods eaten whole. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do for diabetes, is eating whole plant foods whole. And it's actually the simplest, most efficient way to eat. You can go to the produce department and get whole food, and just with minimal preparation actually have delicious meals. And so I'm a big advocate of the whole food plant-based movement. So there are some challenges to healthy eating, and one of those is that we live in a society that's full of advertising, and the world, the flesh, and the devil seem to get together and try to encourage us to make poor choices. And advertising is one of those things that's not really worried about our health. Advertising is worried about the bottom line or their financial interests. And so when you see advertising, most of the time you're not seeing advertisements for broccoli and cauliflower. You're seeing advertisements for refined and processed foods that are quite expensive and very damaging to your health. So there's a myriad of challenges to making good choices. And I'm just going to go over in a general way some of the types of things that can be challenging for us. We often have emotional challenges. Sometimes there's traditions or emotional attachments that are related to food that will pull us to make choices that are less than ideal. Also, there can be relationships. Oftentimes, if you have a couple, sometimes if both of them are heavy, one of them decides they want to be healthy and they decide to lose weight, it's threatening for the other part of the couple. And so that can be a challenge. Or sometimes a family is not necessarily supportive of the choices that you're making, and that can make a challenge as well. There are psychological challenges. We can have all or nothing thinking or be very self-limiting in the way that we view food. There may be depression or mental illness, and all of those things can be psychological challenges to making good nutritional choices. Then we have physical issues. Sometimes disease processes will actually not help us to make good choices. So if we're struggling with certain kinds of diseases, we may have cravings or other types of physical pulls on us to make poor choices. Sometimes there are financial issues. We may think that it's too expensive to purchase healthy food. I would make the argument that it's much cheaper to buy healthy food than it is to pay for medications. So it's much better and financially more responsible to make healthy choices than to make unhealthy ones. And then, of course, education. There's so many voices, so many thoughts out there on what is healthy and what isn't. And so that can be very confusing. And so sometimes we need more education. And then there's the whole category of addictions that can make food choices challenging. And we won't be able to go very far into that, but it is often one of the more challenging parts of making good choices is when we're dealing with addictions. So what should we do? I would make an argument that a fundamental thing that a diabetic needs to do, or someone who's either pre-diabetic or has other symptoms that diabetes may be coming, is to follow the fiber. And I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Dennis Burkett. If you've ever heard of Dr. Dennis Burkett, wave your hand. Have you ever heard of him? Okay, he was a surgeon from England, and during the Second World War, he served with their Army Corps of Medical, their Army Medical Corps, and he went to Somalia and Kenya, and he became convinced that he needed to go to some third world country and serve because they had such needs there. And so even though he had a thriving practice in England, he chose to go to Uganda, and he spent something north of 20 years in Uganda. And as he said later, he thought he was throwing his career away by doing that, but in reality, that is the reason we still remember Dr. Burkett these days. So there were two things that he did. First, he identified a lymphoma in children in Uganda that nobody knew what to do about, nobody knew about. Ultimately, it became known as Burkett's lymphoma. He learned about it, he worked on ameliorating it, finding ways to treat it, and became quite prominent as a result of that. The second thing that he's known for is that when he returned to England, he started noticing that the people he was caring, he was treating, had much different disease processes than what they had in Uganda. In Uganda, they might have snake bite or burns or malaria or tuberculosis or something, but in England, the people that he was treating were facing lifestyle diseases. And he felt very strongly that these were tied to their manner of eating. So one of the quotes here I have from him, the concept that Western diseases are lifestyle related and therefore potentially preventable and reversible is the most important medical discovery of the 20th century. Now we're now in the 21st century, and we're still trying to harness this idea of lifestyle as a way of preventing and reversing disease. And we have plenty of data to show that it actually works, but there's a lot of people who aren't actually using that information to have better health. He identified a number of diseases to a low fiber intake: atherosclerosis, heart disease, diabetes, varicose veins, cancer, hiatal hernia, diverticular disease, and hemorrhoids. And he felt that if people had higher fiber intake, that there would be much less of these lifestyle diseases. He wrote a couple of books, and he went on the lecture circuit, and he would go to churches and schools and clubs and anyone who would give him a hearing, and he would talk about fiber, and he would take pictures of stool samples and all kinds of things. And it was quite horrific to people in the 1950s. You know, it wasn't something that people talked about a lot. And at that time, fiber was seen as not a vital nutrient, like it didn't matter. And so nobody understood the vital role that fiber played. One of his statements is, Western diets are so low in bulk, that is fiber, and so dense in calories that our intestines just don't pass enough volume to remain healthy. And a lot of diseases start there in the intestine. Another one of his quotes was that if you have large stools, you can have small hospitals, but if you have small stools, you will need large hospitals. And so he was very big on encouraging people to eat fiber. Now, just to explain it a little bit, so that in case, just for anybody who doesn't know, let's say you're going to eat 120 calories of broccoli. That would be 4 cups of broccoli, and you would get 9.6 grams of fiber. However, if you eat 120 calories of oil, that's 2 tablespoons and no fiber. So you can see how quickly you would end up with a lot of calories, very little fiber, and a lot of health challenges as a result of that. So Dr. Burkett felt that the frying pan you should give to your enemy. Food should not be prepared in fat. Our bodies are adapted to a Stone Age diet of roots and vegetables. And that goes right along with this idea of whole plant foods eaten whole, not fried in a lot of oil and not mixed with a lot of fat. So let's talk a little bit about what is fiber. To do that, we need to talk about carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates can be divided into 3 categories. You've got your simple carbohydrates, your complex carbohydrates, and then fiber, which is divided into 2 sections: soluble and insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber being oats and oatmeal, legumes, vegetables, and fruit, and insoluble being things like wheat bran and vegetables and whole grains. I want to spend just a second talking about carbohydrates, because I think carbohydrates have gotten a really bad rap. We tend to hear a lot about low carb, and so people have this feeling that carbohydrates are not good for us. But in reality, I would say that would be simple carbohydrates are not good for us. And that would be things like soda pop and candy and donuts and cookies and cakes and things that really spike your blood sugar, no fiber to help moderate the entrance of the glucose to your bloodstream. They're just sort of straight up carbs. I agree, simple carbohydrates probably are not good for most anybody and should probably be eliminated from most diets. However, complex carbohydrates, those that come as they were created, in other words, broccoli as an individual food, or sweet potatoes, or spinach, and raspberries and blueberries and strawberries, these things were created in a package in a way that they can be well absorbed into the body with the right amount of fiber, the right amount of phytochemicals and nutrients and antioxidants, that they can be well used in the body, and we need them. So Just some random facts about carbohydrates. Carbohydrate is brain food. If you want to think well, you need to have carbohydrates in your diet. And those individuals who are on a very low carbohydrate diet end up finding that they do not think as well because they don't have the carbohydrate for the brain food that they need. Carbohydrates do not cause obesity, contrary to popular opinion. And carbohydrate is the body's preferred fuel. And it's necessary to have carbohydrates in the diet. Carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram as opposed to oil, which has 9 calories per gram. So it has less calories per nutrient volume. So a quote from the American Diabetes Association sort of says it the best. It says, several studies have shown that the adverse metabolic effects of a high carbohydrate diet are neutralized when fiber and carbohydrates are increased simultaneously in the diet for diabetic patients. In particular, these studies demonstrated that a high carbohydrate, high fiber diet significantly improves blood glucose control. And wait, my quote is covered up. Plasma cholesterol levels in diabetic patients compared with a low carbohydrate, low fiber diet. So it's beneficial in a number of different ways in the fact that it controls the blood sugar, but it also helps control cholesterol levels. So most diabetics are also being treated for cardiovascular disease because the two diseases kind of tend to go together. So you've got a double bang for your buck. When you take a lot of a lot of fiber, it improves your blood glucose level as well as your plasma cholesterol levels. And that's one of the great things about plant foods is that it not only helps one thing, it helps a number of things all at the same time. So back to the question of what is fiber? Fiber is the indigestible part of the food that we eat. There is no fiber in meat or dairy or eggs. There's only fiber in plant foods. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate that the body doesn't digest, and it's divided into 2 categories, soluble and insoluble. And I have a picture here of soluble fiber, barley, oats, beans, figs, prunes, and sweet potatoes, and insoluble fiber, such as whole grains, lentils, legumes, apples, avocados, strawberries. It isn't so necessary to focus on whether the fiber is soluble or insoluble. Just getting a wide variety of all kinds of fiber is going to be beneficial. So here's an illustration of what happens. The food as grown here on the left would be your apple. Comes off the tree just like it is. We can eat it. It has the right amount of fiber, the right amount of carbohydrate, the nutrients and all the vitamins that are needed to digest it well and assimilate it into the body. And with one apple, you have about 4.4 grams of fiber. Now you take the skin off of it and cook it down and you end up with applesauce over there. And now you have about 2.2 grams of fiber. And then if you make it into apple juice on the bottom there, you end up with less than 0.5 gram of fiber. So you lose fiber with every process of refining that happens. So not all processed foods are bad. You could say when we cut up broccoli and cook it that we're processing it, but we're not refining it. We're not taking something away. With the apple, we have a refining process where the fiber is going away, and it is a highly processed food by the time it gets to fruit juice. And that processed foods are by and large not going to be beneficial for health. And here's another quick example, brown rice, which has 3.5 grams of fiber in a cup compared to white rice, which has about 1.5 grams of fiber per cup. And then the brown rice syrup, which actually has no fiber at all. So a lot of people will say, well, I use brown rice syrup. It's my sweetener of choice. You know, it's got to be healthy for you, right? It's brown rice syrup. But in fact, there's no fiber there, and it will have the similar effect to your blood sugar, spiking it quite high. And so it would be something that would be ideal to be avoided. So what does fiber do? Fiber helps regulate the body's use of sugars, and it helps to keep hunger and blood sugar in check. So the more fiber in your diet, the more it fills your stomach, you get the sense of satiety or the feeling that you have eaten enough to feel full. And that's what you get with fiber. Without fiber, you can eat a lot of calories and never actually feel full. You could compare it like eating a potato versus eating potato chips. You can eat an awful lot of potato chips and never really feel full. But if you eat a number of potatoes, you'll feel full and you'll get the fiber that's needed there. Fiber contributes to healthy regularity and elimination of the body's waste products. And a lot of diseases start when you don't have, when constipation is present. That is one of the beginning stages of some kinds of disease processes. Fiber provides a feeling of satiety and fullness. I just mentioned that. It also helps to reduce cholesterol levels. And it's like a little bristle brush that brushes through your intestine and helps take some of those cholesterol plaques away with it. Fiber reduces the risk of developing colon cancer. So there's a lot of benefits to fiber. Typically in the US, people eat about 15 grams of fiber a day, which is half, probably at least, of what people should be eating. Ideally, we should be taking 25 to 100 grams. Dr. Burkett argued that there isn't actually a top level for fiber. It's just the more fiber you eat, the healthier you would be. I would say an ideal target is probably 30 to 40 grams of fiber as kind of a minimum on the day. And the more, as he said, the better. And building up to that is really, really good. And that's one of the ways to lose weight without feeling deprived, because your stomach is full. If you eat lots of vegetables and lots of salad and don't drown it with a lot of dressing, you're getting full, but you're not necessarily getting a huge amount of calories. And that's one a great benefit. So one of the studies, the Harvard, actually both Harvard studies, the one of female nurses and of male health professionals, found that a diet low in fiber and high in foods that cause blood sugar spikes more than doubled the risk of type 2 diabetes when compared to a diet high in cereal fiber, that would be in whole grains, and low in high glycemic index foods, or those foods that would spike your blood sugar. So it really reduces your risk of type 2 diabetes to eat a high fiber diet. So I don't know if Lucia has recommended yet Wes Youngberg's book, Goodbye Diabetes. I don't know if some of you have seen this, but it's a great resource. He and Brenda Davis, and a registered dietitian, have come up with a whole grain hierarchy. And the primary intake of grains should be intact whole grains. That would be like wheat berries, kamut berries, spelt berries, quinoa, barley, but as whole grains, cooked whole grains. Now, secondarily, cut whole grains like steel cut oats or bulgur, rolled oats, rolled barley, rolled rye, rolled wheat. And then thirdly, the shredded whole grains, shredded wheat, ground whole grains such as flour products, flaked whole grains like flaked cereals, and then puffed grains, wheat, rice, barley, whatever, puffed. And so I would say that for diabetics, primarily the grain that you eat should be intact whole grains. You're going to get the most benefit. It's going to have the best impact on your blood sugar. It's going to spike your blood sugar the least, and it'll give you the maximum amount of fiber. So ideally the whole grains, and then possibly cut. If you're struggling with blood sugars that are kind of out of control, I would leave off at least the third level of whole grains, and possibly even the second, for a while until your blood sugars are under better control. So this is just a infographic that I thought was really neat because it shows pictures. Basically, it shows that legumes have somewhere between 6 and 8 grams of fiber per half a cup, that vegetables are somewhere between 4 and 6 grams of fiber per cup, and fruit between, well, there you see apples at 4.4 and raspberries at 8 grams in a cup. Your whole grains are going to be somewhere between 5 and 6 grams of fiber per cup. And this one suggests, this from the Journal of Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, recommends 40 grams of fiber per day. So the bottom line is, if it has fiber, eat it. If it doesn't, avoid it. If you pick something up and it has no fiber, it's probably not something that's going to be beneficial, especially if you're dealing with blood sugars. It is much better to eat more fiber and to avoid those things that are without fiber. So follow the fiber as you're going in your in the store or wherever in your own kitchen, when you're looking around, if something has fiber, the more fiber, the better. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about tactics or strategies um, for how to sort of face the holidays specifically. But one of the greatest tactics that I learned at Weimar that they do there every single day is eat a quarter to a half a cup of beans at breakfast. And it's important to eat them at breakfast. What they have found is that it actually um, moderates the blood sugar throughout the day if you eat the beans at breakfast. And so it's a really important thing. Plus, it helps you to feel satisfied and full. And if you eat that along with a whole grain cereal in the morning, you will not be hungry before your next meal. So it's really a valuable and important tactic to start to do, is to have your beans at breakfast. In fact, at Weimar, I think they had beans almost at every meal. So that was something that they used quite a bit in order to increase the fiber. So as Lucia has been saying each day, you can do it. This is a good intervention to face the holidays well, is to make sure that you're following the fiber and eating a very high fiber diet. So for the homework, I would like for you to keep a 24-hour record of the food that you've eaten and estimate the fiber that you get on a normal day. There's a form that you can fill out. It says day 4 on it, and maybe Lucia will talk a little bit more about that. But if you print it out and then just keep track today, if you can remember what you had for breakfast, if you've had breakfast yet, and keep track for one day. There's a number of different apps you can use to figure out the fiber content. Either MyFitnessPal, Fitbit has a food app, or you can just go online and search item by item and say, how much fiber is in a cup of oats or whatever, and get sort of a baseline so that you understand where you are with fiber. And then we'll be talking about more tactics tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That was really valuable information. Boy, I'm getting the sun right in my eyes this morning. So I'm really glad that you brought that out, because I think that is such a fundamental question. And when we're getting high fiber, it takes care of a lot of other issues when it comes to food choices. So it kind of simplifies our ability to evaluate what's going to be a good food or not so good. Now, I want to she was referring to that homework sheet, which is going to be going into the Facebook group. Right, as soon as we're done with our meeting here, I'll upload it there so that you can download it. And I want to give you also one other assignment tool. It's an assessment tool that is going to be part of your homework for today, because it will also help you as you're evaluating your food choices. What we have here is the diet matrix, and this is a way to kind of evaluate the quality of your food choices. So Cindy was talking about fiber, and this is kind of linked to it, but it looks at it a little bit different way. This is another matrix similar to the diabetic management matrix we were looking at yesterday, and that it works a similar way. And the horizontal line is a continuum between refined and processed foods on the left to whole foods over on the right. Then the vertical axis is a continuum from animal products on the bottom to plant-based products on the top. And so you can give yourself a score, for example, on a plate of food. You can look at that plate of food and say, okay, how much of this plate is refined and processed, and how much of this plate is whole foods? If it was half and half, you'd give yourself a 5. And so you can see that you can kind of evaluate how much of this was refined and how much of this was whole foods. And that gives you one number. Then you can also look at it and say how much of what's on my plate is from an animal and how much is plant-based. If it was half and half, you'd also get a 5. If it was mostly plant-based, you might be up more like a 6 or a 7 or an 8. If it was all plant-based, it's 10. If it's all animal products, it's 1. Most of us eat somewhere between 1 on 10 on each of the axes. So this is just kind of a way to look at, you can look at a plate and score it. You can look at a recipe and score it. You can look at your daily intake and score it, or your habits over time and score them. So you can see that you can use this in a lot of different ways. But since we're doing like a 1 day thing with your fiber, you might want to do this for the same day, looking at in this day, how much of what I ate was plant-based versus animal products and refined or processed versus whole foods. Refined processed food means something's been taken away. So that's kind of the basic definition there. So let me show you a little bit more about what these numbers then mean. These put you into one of 4 squares. The bottom red square is what I call sad, sick souls, because that's where the standard American diet is, SAD. It's also a diet that puts you at very high risk for depression and chronic illnesses. So if you, most of what you're eating is refined and processed, and most of what you're eating are animal products, you are in that red square. Now, some people have become more educated and they've decided, oh, we need to get away from some of the refined and processed foods. And they're still eating a lot of animal products, but maybe they're choosing higher quality animal products. By that, I mean, they might be eating eggs from free range chickens or, grass fed beef, organic animal products, organic cheeses and milks and so on. So I put them in the concerned citizens quadrant, which means they're moving more towards whole foods, but there's still quite an emphasis on animal products. If you go up to the yellow square, that's what I call the junk food vegans. They're basically plant-based, but the majority of what they're eating is refined and processed foods. There are a lot of people in that yellow square that think that because they're vegan or eating plant-based, that they're eating healthy. But as any of us could realize, there are a lot of things that have no animal products, but are not healthy. For example, Oreos are vegan, so are French fries. And, it's like, and the list goes on, jam and jelly, all of those would fit over there in that quadrant. And that is not the kind of food that is going to make you into a healthy, happy human, which is where we all want to be, up in the right-hand corner. And so you might find yourself at different places within these quadrants. And it really doesn't matter where you are today, because what I want to encourage you to do is to do an assessment and add this to your baseline data from your spreadsheet in your diabetic baseline assessment. And this will also give you a really good objective way to say, where am I right now in the diet matrix? And the good news is that it doesn't matter where you are today, you can make choices that move you towards the green square. And anything you do that moves you towards that green square, like more plants on your plate and more whole foods on your plate, is going to give you health benefits. The amount of benefit that you enjoy will be completely dose dependent, which means the more plants, the better. The more whole, the better. And then as we do that, we're also going to see a better management of our blood sugars. Now, there are people who can eat all plant-based and all whole foods that still struggle with blood sugar. So we will talk a little bit more about choices within the plant-based whole food arena that can help us with blood sugar control. So, but it still helps to know kind of where you are in this general matrix, because that might give you some really easy things that you can change or sub out and get benefit right away. So this is part of your homework. I will upload like a blank diet matrix. It just has like the colors and the black lines. And then you can, and the scores, and then you can fill in kind of where you are, like put little dots maybe for each meal, and then kind of look at what's an average to figure out, am I eating more refined and processed food or more whole foods, and where on this continuum? More animal products or more plant-based, and where on that vertical continuum? So if you have any questions about that, I'll take those questions in the question and answer period, but I just was hoping that was going to be clear. So you have one homework from Cindy and one homework from me. And I want to emphasize, as Cindy did, you can do it. So I hope that each day as we go through this challenge, you are adding steps to your ability to manage and make really good choices going into the holidays. But I want to make sure we have some time today for questions, because now we have a little bit more meat. Cindy had posed a question at the beginning of her presentation about things you perceive as obstacles in making the best choices for your diabetes or your pre-diabetes in the holidays going forward. And I really would like you to take a couple of minutes before we get into questions and answers to go into the chat and put down what you see personally as being the biggest obstacles that need to be overcome. So I'm just going to press pause here and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to write. Go ahead and put that in the chat, and then I'm going to unmute everybody and we'll go into our question and answer period. So this is the time to pop into your chat. If you're on the computer, the chat is down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're on the phone, it will be behind the three little dots that are at the bottom of your screen. If we tap on those three little dots on your phone, it will give you a choice of different things. Chat is one of them. Tap on chat, and it'll open up a screen where you can type in your obstacles. While you're doing that, I'm going to answer a question that has come in our chat, and then we will look at all of your answers. I thank you for putting stuff in the chat, but Wendy and Jackie, I'd really like to hear from you too, what you're seeing as any obstacles that you might be facing going into the holidays in terms of making these choices. So one of the questions that came in was, I want to know the difference between metabolic syndrome and prediabetes. And that's a really good question. We talked about metabolic syndrome yesterday, I think it was, or was it the day before? Anyway, I know we talked about it in one of our previous presentations. And metabolic syndrome is like a basket of symptoms that we see together often. It includes things like getting more belly fat, having blood pressures that are going up, maybe having high insulin levels, but you still have normal blood sugars with metabolic syndrome. When your blood sugars start to go up and they're out of the normal range, then we're starting to look at prediabetes. Now, there is, if you look at your spreadsheet from your diabetic baseline assessment, you will notice that if you look at fasting blood sugar row, that there's an optimal level. And then there's like level number 1. There's a bit of a gap between optimal blood sugars and diagnosis for prediabetes. That gap would be abnormally high blood sugars, but not high enough to get a diagnosis of prediabetes. And so I encourage people, if you get into that range, which is high blood sugars, but not diagnostic for prediabetes, which is a certain level of blood sugar, diabetes is a higher level of blood sugar. So the only difference between prediabetes and diabetes is that range for your fasting blood sugars and a range for your hemoglobin A1C. If you look at the column for 2 points, for the hemoglobin A1C and for the fasting blood sugar, those are considered abnormally high, but they're not diagnostic for prediabetes. As you move into the higher ranges, that becomes prediabetes or diabetes. So that should be helpful. Did that help to answer your question, Denise? Or if you still have any questions, feel free to pop it up. I'll be unmuting people in just a minute. So I'm going to read some of the things that have gone in the chat. Denise loves that tactic of eating beans at breakfast. And I was going to tell Cindy, I do too. I eat beans for breakfast every single day. Most days it's a whole bean. Once in a while I'll have like tofu or something instead, but it's still a bean product. It still gives you that protein that's so important for diabetics to start their day with. I think you get more of the second meal effect in terms of blood sugar control with whole legumes versus maybe things like tofu. But yes, you can switch it up sometimes. And I've got to admit, I'm really big on this. Like I eat like a cup of beans every breakfast. So I was looking at that quarter to half a cup and I'm just like, oh, that's hardly anything. But I love starting my day with beans, and it really does make a difference. I don't get hungry before lunch and I feel good, and it's awesome. Okay, so Jackie was saying in terms of challenges, and I haven't seen a challenge from Denise, and I will share my challenge just kind of orally here. I don't yet know what we're doing in terms of getting together as family. But there are a lot of things that we like to eat at the holidays. Like a holiday food for us is empanadas, which is kind of like a pie crust that's stuffed with rice and veggies and mushrooms. It's a Colombian dish. My mother is Colombian. And so it's something that we like to do at special occasions like Thanksgiving. That's a really big one. Growing up, my aunts would all get together in my grandmother's kitchen and they'd make empanadas all day long. We'd have several hundred empanadas and then everybody would sit down and that would be a really important part of our meal, even though it wasn't everything. But the crust is like a pie crust, right? So you've got flour, you've got quite a bit of oil because it's a really flaky crust. And so you can go through a lot of that if you eat like 5 or 6 empanadas, right? So I know that I don't tolerate flour-based products very well. It's really hard for me to control my blood sugars if I get very much flour-based breads or pie crust or things like that. So I still have to figure out what I'm going to do to get around that, and it might end up being I just have to eat a small amount, like confine myself to one a meal versus 6 or 7, which is probably what I would normally want because they're small, they're not that big, but there's just so much oil in the crust. And then the stuffing is like half rice. And once again, with my blood sugar issues, I have to be careful. Even though we use brown rice, it's whole grain rice, I can't just eat a cup of rice at a meal. I usually have to look at more like a third of a cup, and that be the starch for the meal, right? So those are some of the things that I have to think about. Desserts are not as big a deal with us because we often do a lot of just fruit desserts. Like maybe make some soft serve ice cream that's just whizzed up fruit in the blender with a little bit of unsweetened almond milk or something like that. And so that's not as big a deal. But we don't do a lot of like cakes and cookies and things. And my husband has a really big sweet tooth. And so he's always wanting pies and cookies on hand, right? And so we kind of have a little back and forth on that. And I just try to keep pretty healthy stuff. And then he just often end up eating more of it than I can eat. And he is really good natured and he likes a lot of things. So it's not too hard to please him. But yeah, I mean, my mother is Colombian and she almost doesn't feel like she's had a meal if she hasn't had rice. And so she wants rice all the time. And so I'm always having to fix rice, put it on, but then most of the time I don't have any or only have a small amount. But I have to remember to have that fixed so that she has her rice. And so, as we work with family and our family preferences, that does affect it. Okay. So Jackie says, someone in my household has dentures and cannot chew a lot of whole foods. So that's a challenge to fix whole foods. For example, applesauce is fine, but not whole apples. All right, great challenge. Cindy, do you have an idea that could help with that particular obstacle? Let's just kind of do a little brainstorming here for a few minutes of ideas of ways to meet that obstacle. All right, go ahead, Cindy.
Well, what I've been experimenting with is applesauce made with the skin on. And you can blend the whole thing up. So like if you cook down whole apples with the skin and all and blend it up, you get the fiber. It's just that it's been pre-masticated, so to speak. So that is one of the possibilities, that you can same thing with, let's say, potatoes. Sometimes people, take the skins off the potatoes. Well, they're losing a lot of the fiber that way. That's another area where you can just get used to having the skin included. So
Okay.
that would
Yes, I like those ideas. Thank you, Cindy. Another one is you can make raw applesauce, like just quarter an apple, take the core out and throw it in a food processor. It doesn't make it quite as like creamy pureed as a blender. So it still has some texture, but usually people with dentures can handle that as well. So there are some other ways that they can get whole fruit. Jackie, does that help? Feel free to unmute. I am going to let anybody unmute there that wants. So anyway, those are
thank you.
okay. Another one. Denise says, I can do this, but my husband and adult children still eat cheese, eggs, and I always cook that way for them. The kids stay for a whole week. I wish I could cook healthy for them and they would like it. Oh, I like that. Okay. So I have a couple of suggestions on that line, and I'm going to let Cindy throw in some suggestions as well, because both of us have dealt with a lot of people that have this challenge. This is a very common challenge. I want to eat healthy. My family isn't interested. How do I do this? And I have to prepare food for everybody. And especially at holidays when they might be expecting that pecan pie that you always made for Christmas, or, that bread stuffing, I think that sometimes, especially at holidays, part of it means we think about preparing so that we're not overloaded on the day or the week of the holidays. Put stuff in the freezer ahead of time. And even though we might provide them with some of the same things they're used to or they want, also make some things that you can eat.
Mhm.
And so that maybe they have something that has cheese. Can you make yourself several portions without the cheese, or something that would just be an alternate menu item? And I suggest making enough of that alternate menu item for everybody to have some, because it's not unusual, especially if it's a really nice, delicious, tasty recipe, that all of those like non-healthy eaters are just going to like it, and they will end up eating a bunch of it, and you don't want to be left with nothing to eat. So make enough. If you're going to somebody else's house, I do the same thing. I'll make enough for everybody, even if I might be the only one eating it. And it's really amazing. People will often try it. I mean, just being polite, and they'll be like, oh, wow, this is really good. And they aren't necessarily going to be thinking things like, well, this doesn't have any cheese, I'm not going to eat it. Or this doesn't have any meat, I'm not going to eat it. It's if it's a really, an attractive, tasty, smells good dish, they're going to try it. It's really funny. I've talked to a lot of carnivores, like people that are just really dyed in the wool meat eaters, and they're like, they have to have their meat. And then maybe I'll have them over for lunch or something, and I won't serve them any meat. I'll just serve them a great meal, and they'll love it. And then it's like they won't even notice that, oh, there wasn't any meat. Or they'll be like the first time they've ever had a meal without meat, and they felt full and satisfied and enjoyed it. So encourage them to try this in addition to whatever it is that they're used to eating or wanting to eat.
Well,
Cindy.
just can I jump in there? I would say, if you make it, if it's pretty, if it's nice to look at, if you look at it and go, yeah, that really looks delicious, that's a big thing. And I don't think you have to promote it so much, because you kind of, I would do it with the idea, well, if nobody else eats it, I'm going to enjoy it, and not feel the pressure to like necessarily encourage somebody else to like it or take it or
Yeah.
whatever. They can do what they want. It's perfectly fine. But you just take something that you know is delicious and looks really good. And a lot of times it's surprising when people will be like, well, it's not bad. They all automatically assume, because maybe it doesn't have what they're used to, that it won't be good. But once they try it, a lot of times it is good. So.
And one other really important psychological tip: don't announce that it's a plant-based
No, oh my no.
dish. Don't announce that it doesn't have cheese, milk, eggs. Don't announce that it's vegetarian even.
No.
Just, this is my favorite roast, loaf, casserole, dessert.
Patties. Yeah.
Be done with it. And don't say anything about what's in it or not in it.
Right.
Because psychologically, if you do that, people just like barriers go up, and they're like, oh, that's vegetarian, I don't even want to try it.
Well, so let me just say, they did studies, and they took breakfast bars, and they uh, had people rate them for whether it tasted good, whether it looked good, and whether it was healthy. And then they put a sticker on it that said, now with soy. And the taste went down and the perceived health went up, which goes to show that people assume that soy is not going to taste good. So you want to just go with it, and no announcements, no discussion, because it predisposes people to be negative if you make a big deal out of it.
Yeah. Okay, Wendy, my biggest challenge in the holidays is unhealthy holiday family favorites and sugar. Although I will not be with family this year, I'll have expectations of what a holiday meal should look and smell like. Yeah, that is really, really big. And so what you want to make sure that you're doing is you're being intentional about providing things that you can eat that aren't high in sugar. Sometimes you can adjust family favorite recipes. And I would encourage you to bring some of those recipes to this group. Like if there's a traditional food that you always want, it just doesn't feel like Thanksgiving or doesn't feel like Christmas without it. bring that recipe to our group and let's get some ideas on there may be ways to do something that's very similar but very much more healthy. And I even take a lot of standard dessert recipes and just cut the sugar in half and then have a very small portion. So between doing some modifications, and sometimes you can sub out healthier options and it doesn't change the taste or the texture or anything, people won't even know.
That's right.
But you might need to like brainstorm a little bit with some of us in the group to get some ideas of how to do that. Um, and then experiment a little bit. I was like, we're really early in November still, so you have some time to do a couple of experimental runs on something and see how it turns out. So that if even if you're like sending a casserole to somebody because you're not actually sharing the meal or you're sending a dessert, you can work on some things that if they're healthier and they're still like tasty and attractive and appealing, your family's going to still appreciate it. Okay. So yeah, that's a great one to bring up. Thank you, Wendy. And then all right, Jackie said the suggestions were good. Can you give some good recipes everyone will like? Okay, I think we will plan to do that. No, it won't be today, but I think tomorrow. What I've been thinking of doing is I have a Thanksgiving menu that is plant-based. Now, it is a little richer than what we would have for regular everyday food. So it does mean that you're going to want to like really up the salad on your plate and just have smaller portions maybe of some of the main dish, some of the gravy, some of the, dessert. But, you have the option of filling up. And, one of the things I was just thinking about, and I think I'm going to say that here so that I don't forget to mention it, is that even when you go like to a company party or something like that, where they just have like snacks and hors d'oeuvres and, little cookies and things like that. Nowadays, it's very common for there to be also a vegetable platter. And if there isn't, that is something you can take. And a really pretty big, attractive vegetable platter can give you enough food to fill up on and to enjoy without having to indulge in a lot of the other less healthy choices that might be there. Especially if you take like a low fat, no sugar dip for your veggies, something like a homemade hummus. That can be a really great combination with vegetables. Then you got your whole bean, you got your vegetable. You can actually make a meal out of that. So those are just some ideas I want to throw out there. Write them down if you think that's going to be something helpful to remember. When you go to a family meal, you can always, even if you were asked to bring, the pie or the cake, you can also, in addition, bring a big vegetable platter. I mean, who's going to turn down more food, right? And vegetables are not that expensive. It's something that's pretty. It can be even a centerpiece on a table. And we'll talk some more about some ideas on that. I believe tomorrow Cindy's going to be bringing us some. So that's enough for today. Your homework is tracking your fiber and tracking your diet matrix. Where are you in terms of moving towards that green square? And both of those will be uploaded into your group here in the next 10 or 15 minutes. I might also throw in a video there sometime today for you to watch that's related to what we're doing. I want everybody to unmute at this point. I want to say thank you for being here on day 4 of the challenge.
Okay.
Go ahead and unmute. And anybody have any questions or any comments we can deal with before we close down here?
I was just wondering I still don't know how to download those things. And so could you send those to my husband's email
Yes.
that you're going to send so he can print them? Thank you.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you.
Does anybody else prefer getting the handouts and downloads by email? Doesn't matter. Okay, then we're good. All right, well, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being with us today on day 4. Tomorrow, day 5, Cindy's going to be back with us with a whole bunch of ideas going forward.
Good,
And
good. Yay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I promised you before we finished, I did want to hear your goals and plans, your homework from days 1 and 2. Let's take a few minutes to do that before we close down. Anybody ready to share what you've got? Don't be shy.
see.
Maybe let's start by pulling out your baseline assessment. And with the data that you've been able to plug into that so far, share what is one of your health priorities based on that assessment.
Well, for mine, this is Wendy.
Okay.
For my assessment, I definitely have to lose weight and have a target. And a lot of times I get over exuberant and want to do everything at one time.
Mm.
And I'm going to try to limit myself to a pound, a half a pound to a pound a week. I think is more obtainable than many other numbers I could come up with. I'm going to, before we even had the bean talk, this is something Lucy and I had talked about before, and I do often incorporate beans in the morning. It does help. Also, exercising at least 5 days a week, walking.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. You got muted, Wendy. Go ahead and unmute. That was accidental.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Exercise. I do have back issues and it doesn't always work out, but I do try to shoot for 5 days a week with that. And purchasing one of the what do you call it? Gloss meter?
Oh, glucometer?
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I want to start tracking what after meals, what it looks like for me, just to give me a baseline for that.
Good.
So that's as far as I've gotten with my list here.
Well, that's a good start. Thank
my
you,
score
Wendy.
wasn't great, so I do know that I've got lots of work to do.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to figure out, okay, what is like my top 1 or 2 things to address, and focus on that first. Mm-hmm. And as you focus on that, it's also probably going to help some of the other things that were a priority. And after you've been making some progress, you've got some habits down that are helping you with those high priority things, then add, okay, what's another thing I can do that will help me with my number 2 or my number 3 thing. So I think that's good to kind of pace yourself a little and work that way. So thank you for sharing that, Wendy.
Sure. Well, add my beans more vigilantly in here too. After listening to Cindy about it, it just kind of reminded me that it helps.
Yes. All right. Denise, based on your baseline and the data you have for it so far, what are you seeing as things that are going to be a high priority for you?
Well, I'm still working on that baseline because now I found medical records from just March of this year, and so I got to get that in, and I'm working on it. So far, like I say, I'm getting the highest points, a 3 in the age, and I can't do anything about that. Right. Like you said, I'm 68, but the other things I can all work on. And my waistline has gotten, bigger. I mean, I never had a weight issue before, and now it's up like, used to be like 29, and now it's up to 32 and a half, 33. And it's just like, what is going on? And the high blood pressure. And I'm going to work on I think my blood pressure goes up, well, partly because of having pain now, but stress will make my blood pressure go up. And so I'm going to do more claiming promises and more praying to give my stress to God. And then the other thing, as far as with my waist circumference, I have been totally plant-based, but I'm a little bit on that side where it could be plant-based. I mean, junk food, and not real bad, but like I'll buy these bars that have just dates and nuts and stuff in them, and that doesn't fill you up. You know, that's 200 calories and it's just a little bar. But I'm really starting to really increase my fiber. And you guys talked about that so much. And then I don't get hungry for those other things.
Yes.
So I'm just really, and the beans, that's a wonderful thing. I mean, I do eat beans, but not every day, but I'm going to do it. And I love beans, all kinds of beans.
Oh, good for
So,
you.
yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Jackie, any ideas going forward for you?
Oh, my biggest challenge, can you hear me?
Yes.
My biggest challenge is getting enough exercise in. It's always been, you know, way down there. I need to go way up there. I'm currently doing 2 days a week, and I'm going to be, I set a goal that's realistic and attainable. And for me, that would be adding one more day.
Okay.
So that's my challenge, is to add an extra day. And then once I get settled on 3 days a week, then I'll up it to 4 days. So I'm just gonna.
Good.
That's my strategy.
That's great. That's
And
great.
I also need to make sure that I'm constantly drinking water, getting enough water. I usually do pretty well with that, but sometimes I forget. So that's up there.
Good. All right. I like that. And that's so important. What Jackie brought up is like, when you're making a change, make sure it's a change that you can maintain. Because more important, like, to go from 2 to 3 days and keep up that 3 days than to say, oh, I'm going to do 6 days a week. And then 1 week you only get 2 or 3, and then you get so discouraged you can't get started on it again. And it's much better to add in increments that work for you and that you can maintain. Because this is a long-term approach to bettering your health and your ability to deal with your blood sugars. It is not a quick fix. And none of these things happened overnight. It's not going to be overnight that you get things better. But as you are intentional about making better decisions, it's going to benefit you and you're going to see those results. So that's great. So thank you, everybody, for your participation, and be checking in the group today. This recording will probably be up usually by about noon, because I have to edit it a little bit and shorten it, because like I take out all the gaps and the stuff that you don't want to listen to when you go through it again. And so that'll take me a little bit to do, and then I upload it, which usually takes, because I'm in the country, it takes me a couple of hours to get it uploaded to YouTube. So anyway, by noon or so, it's usually up there. So thank you, everybody, and we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
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 Bye.